Welcome to the Battleground Wisconsin. My name's Matt Brusky, and I'm the Deputy Director here at Citizen Action of Wisconsin. And welcome to another week from Wisconsin. We have our full panel, which means Claire Zauke, our Healthcare Director, is with us. Claire, good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's good to have you. It's a sunny day. We record on Thursday mornings. We're all safely in our house because we're still heavily quarantined, and I'll let everybody know I actually have COVID. I tested positive between our shows. And so, yes, we're still all recording safely from our homes. Robert Craig is also with us. Robert, Executive Director.
Happy inauguration week to our digital and radio audiences.
That is correct. That is what we're going to talk about, Robert. We're going to get started talking about, it was a historic week. Obviously, we had the inauguration of our 46th president, Joe Biden, and of course, Vice President Harris, extraordinarily historic vice president. I am going to ask both of you for just your immediate thoughts on the historic moment, but then we are going to dive into, want to talk about immigration right away. The president got immediately busy. And we're going to talk about that. Also, want to let everybody know we will be joined by a few guests later in the show. Kirk Bangstad is going to join us. He is the owner of the Minocqua Brewing Company and has a new SuperPAC that's making a lot of noise in the North Woods. And so we're going to talk to Kirk later in the show. Also, we're going to be joined by Isiah Holmes, who's doing amazing journalism at the Wisconsin Examiner around policing in our communities. He'll join us to talk more about what is going on in Wauwatosa and also to briefly discuss the city of Milwaukee flipping on some federal resources for police officers. So, panel, let's start, though. Got to talk about the inauguration of Joe Biden. Claire, I want to get your immediate thoughts on the historic day. I guess it would yesterday, since we record on Thursday, Wednesday. Claire?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I was struck by was just the difference in this the tone of this celebratory, historic, traditional event that took place at the Capitol and what took place just a couple weeks ago on June 6th in the same building, and how I'm sure that there are window panes and door panels that are still in need of repair after the attack on the Capitol, and how and now we have this event, this inauguration that sort of symbolizes hopefully a fresh start and moving forward. And that was very much the message of Joe Biden's speech. He didn't talk policy at all, really, in his inaugural speech. It was very much about him trying to calm the temperatures of the nation and bring people together. And I think unity is a lovely aspirational message. It doesn't feel necessarily realistic right now, especially when so many of us are still yearning for justice and calling out the communities that did things like attacks on the Capitol and oppose racial justice. But I understand why President Biden, that feels so good to say, why President Biden would want to have that tone.
Absolutely. Robert, your thoughts. I know you're into hugs. Your thoughts on this historic day?
Well, it was tremendously refreshing, obviously, to have everything about it compared to what we've just experienced. And I have to tell you, as someone who, I'm not joking, really does have a PhD in rhetoric, that I've read all the major, the great and the near great and the good inaugural addresses and studied them. And it was an excellent inaugural address, just from a technical standpoint. And the main speechwriter gets a whole ton of credit. That you got to remember, a speechwriter is selected by the president and by now President Biden. And a speechwriter is also sort of writing for the candidate or for the elected leader that they're writing for. There, you can see them as a non-fictional playwright. And so it does attempt to express Biden's views. I think it does it very well. It actually uses a lot of it's kind of like like a Quentin Tarantino movie, and there are constant references to other inaugurals, but you have to have read those inaugurals to see the reference. So that's going on in the text too. But it was pitch perfect as far as not only unity, which is obvious, and a lot of pundits have said it needs to preach unity, but it named just enough of the problems and what's really going on in order to warrant what he's going to do. It also was forward-looking, and that's just the American character. Americans don't like to look back. They look to be positive and look forward. So it talked about what we're going to do about crises, not who did what when. It didn't even mention Donald Trump, which seems fair given that Donald Trump won't mention him. He probably would have if Donald Trump had been civil. So I thought it was a great day, but I also would caution, and people can turn off their sound if they just want positive thoughts this week, given all the negative
come
thoughts.
on, Robert.
Some people are wired that
Come
way,
on.
but I also
They come here for a little dose of Dr. Craig.
made a point of watching Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity because I went back and forth and checked out what was going on in the actual, virtual inaugural celebration. And see Tom Hanks and all of that, but still, that was a bit over the top. But in addition to making fun of how over top the media was about ooh and ahhing, they are saying the same stuff, the same misinformation, that the Democrats are having a war on facts, that the Democrats want to censor everyone, conservatives, and that this is some sort of jihad against good Americans. It was awful and atrocious, and that was to a huge audience. So we have not solved the fundamental problem. There's a lot to contest and contend with, and part of it is just this malignant, not fact-driven stuff that Biden critiqued in his inaugural very effectively.
So one of the best ways one can start to go at things is to get busy and get to work. And President Biden wasted absolutely no time. It was an extremely busy day. And not only did Biden release us, and it did this a few days early with much good press, a recovery bill. And before we talk more about that, in addition, there were a number of executive orders by the time you listen to this, and today there'll be more. I'm going to be close to 30 executive orders around a number of things. But Claire, I wanted you to get your thoughts. One of the things that he is immediately moving on and putting a tremendous amount of focus is on immigration reform, which has been just a long-standing area where there's been complete gridlock and absolute desperate need for movement. Claire, your thoughts on what the president is rolling out?
Yeah, I was really happy to see him get to work on what is functionally day zero of his presidency. It's the benefit of having somebody who's been in the building before and been so close to the office before. He didn't need to go through all of the, let's get the tour and meet everybody and find out what everybody does, right? I mean, he could just walk in and start working. And I think that's just exactly what our country needs at this moment to a great extent, to somebody who understands the job well enough that they can just start cleaning up Trump's mess. And so he did a number of things, like sign a slew of 15, 17 executive orders on everything from, COVID and climate change to immigration. But something that was a bit of a surprise to me was that he laid out a really comprehensive immigration reform bill immediately that he is going to support and try to advance in Congress, that includes paths for citizenship. And this is something that folks in the immigration reform community have been calling for a long time. And I did not expect it to be one of the first bills, maybe the first bill that he rolled out. And so it is really wonderful and surprising, in my opinion, to see. So this bill called the U.S. Citizenship Act would enable undocumented people to apply for temporary legal status with the ability to apply for green cards after 5 years if they passed criminal and national security background checks, pay taxes, etc., which we know that undocumented immigrants do, and as well as enable dreamers and other types of immigrant workers like immigrant farm workers to hold green cards immediately. And then, once folks have green cards and pass additional background checks and do the normal citizenship steps, then they can apply for citizenship, I believe, in years down the road. It also changes words and laws in our laws from like alien to non-citizen, which I think is a refreshing change of language. And as Robert would tell you, rhetoric means something. Our words mean things. And so I think updating language is worth noting. So yeah, I was really excited that we have a president who hit the ground running.
Yeah, it was definitely noticed. There has been a lot of reporting around this, and let's just say it's refreshing because this is a critical part of the coalition that helped elect this president and that is actually changing this country. And we need to make sure that their needs are put and centered in this administration. With that, we got to take a break. When we come back, there's much more we could talk about around the inauguration, but we actually need to talk about some things that are happening in the state because we got a busy show. But you are listening to the Battleground Wisconsin. We're Citizen Action. You can find us at citizenactionwi.org. Welcome back to the Battleground Wisconsin. We're Citizen Action. We spent some time talking about the inauguration, obviously historic, and Claire, appreciate a little deeper dive on some of the immigration stuff, but there's a number of things that are happening here in the state that we must talk about. And one of them, Robert, I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this. There's been a lot happening around the COVID vaccination plan and COVID plans, and we are expanding to 65 and up, which is a huge portion of the population and certainly folks who've been impacted. But wanted to talk to you about the inclusion, and it almost didn't happen, of a number of really critical workers, including people we have been talking about, meat packers and grocery workers and teachers. Robert?
Thanks, Matt. I'm not sure about teachers. They may have been not included as well, because original press reports were just people, everyone over 65. But I know for a fact there were a number of frontline workers in the line of fire, like grocery workers, like meat packing workers, manufacturing workers generally, who have been deemed essential, who were not included. And that not only risked them, but it risked their families. And leaders in organized labor made their concerns heard, and it was changed. So that's good, but that even was necessary really concerns me about what is going on in the Department of Health Services. And we know that the acting secretary has gone to D.C., so we have the acting secretary now who's Governor Doyle's former acting secretary, and I think is very good. I had Karen Timberlake. I had a good experience with her, so hoping we can clean things up. But this
Robert,
is very problematic.
But this is an excellent point. I'm glad you raised this. This is exactly why workers need to have unions, right? Workers' interests are not always front and center. And if you're organized, right, you have the opportunity to have collective action. And so this is a really, again, just yet another important point why we need workers to have a right to a union. And so, Robert, there's a little bit more that I want you to talk about COVID related here in the state. And that is, we've spent a lot of time talking about schools, been very supportive of leading with science and making sure that our schools follow good science, and have been all over districts who have been making bad decisions. But Robert, there's this new COVID strain, which is everyone's heard about, that is spreading around the country. And you have some thoughts around this as it relates to Wisconsin schools. And certainly we know there's going to be a push to reopen.
Well, there is. And it's coming from a lot of progressive parents, to be honest. And what's missing is making it safe to do so, because you're not only risking educators, support staff, administrators, but their whole families. Okay. And really, we don't pay them to be Marines and risk their lives that way. We don't. We don't respect them at that level either as a society, not me as a society. And so the new strain that may be the dominant strain by March in the U.S. and has already started in Great Britain, and there are other new strains developing too, not only spreads more easily, it spreads substantially more easy among kids and young people. In fact, it may be the dominant mode of transmission of this new strain. And in Western Europe, they are reclosing the schools because of this. And here, it's crickets. It's not even being discussed, including by our Department of Health Services. So I'm hoping that now that we have an actual Center for Disease Control back, that the Biden administration will weigh in. But really, guys, these are unforced errors and it's unethical. Now, we can have a discussion about how much force you'd use with school boards, but you got to put out the information and have clear standards of what would be safe. I think you need to have actual regulations and mandates, because we're talking about life and death issues here. And there's a real question now as to whether the vaccine race, which thankfully Joe Biden and his administration is really ramping up, may not beat the new strain. And so we're to race against this new strain right now. And there are other new strains coming from Brazil, from South Africa, et cetera.
Claire?
So building on what Robert said, first of all, a little piece of hope. President Biden is signing another slate of executive orders. I think all of them 10 about COVID response today. And one of them is authorizing the Defense Production Act, which people have been calling for all year. Or all last year, I guess, to help increase the production of PPE as well as vaccines. And another one is to put more energy into developing treatments for COVID as well. So hopefully that's positive, and we will see tremendous movement going forward. The other thing I'll say, though, is, I'm not a parent, but my heart breaks for parents who are in an impossible position right now. It has got to be so hard to go through an entire school year, especially with elementary and middle school aged children, of helping them, not just helping them with their schoolwork and sitting through their courses with them, but watching them be away from their friends and watching if they're children whose mental health is suffering. It's got to be heartbreaking to watch your children go through that. And I think that is a narrative that we don't talk about enough, and is something that early in the pandemic we talked about a little bit, about the burden on parents, but we aren't talking about it as much anymore, and it's only getting harder for them. You're not wrong. The science is right. This new strain is scary, and if the early research indications are accurate, that it poses a greater threat to children, then to your point, Robert, school districts need to know, teachers need to know, we need to make decisions, but I also don't want to, condemn especially progressive parents who might be feeling like I need, maybe protecting my children is getting them back in a classroom. And I'm not saying that's what I support, but I also don't want us to come off like we're villainizing parents who are feeling this way, because they probably are doing it because it's breaking their heart to watch their children suffer. And it is a complicated decision for a lot of families, and I feel for them. And before we go to Robert, I'm sorry, last thing I'll say is, I think this is also a failing of our care infrastructure. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, right? We partner with national organizations who focus a lot on care and caregiving, and it is a failure of our society that we have not supported family caregivers, especially parents who have children, school-age children, and younger in this pandemic.
Look, the argument that it doesn't really transmit from schools is out the window. That's what Western Europe is showing and the data is showing with the new strain. That's number one. But number two, yeah, and I do want to speak truth to some progressive parents. I've heard some things about hysteria. Okay, I understand the concern, and it's real, and it's really affecting kids. The solution is not to make educators and support staff and school administrators cannon fodder. The solution is to make it safe and invest in caregiving and invest in the resources to continue these kids' education in the safest way possible. And we're not doing that. Legislature is not feeling pressure on that at all and is not offering a damn thing. And so it is, and if we're going to say, and it's not just that, the kids will bring it back to their families and they're sacrificing their aunts and uncles and grandparents and anyone with pre-existing conditions. So it is deeply unethical. I understand why folks are triggered and emotional about their kids, but we need to get over it and say, what is keeping the kids out of education? It's not the teachers and the support staff. It is our unwillingness as a society to act like we did in World War II and do what is necessary and do it in a fact-based way. And that's what Joe Biden has talked about. And I hope we can move in that direction. But there should not be a choice. There shouldn't be. It's a false premise. And I don't see you're saying that, Claire, but that's how some parents are thinking. And I know that based on, I've heard amazingly emotional reactions where it can't be discussed in meetings with parents and school boards around the state. It can't even be brought up. They're so upset, and I understand why. It's their kids. But this is not being just open unsafely with this now or with this new strain already in Wisconsin.
Look, this is the reality of what happens when you have a completely inept federal response from soup to nuts and how this thing has been handled. It puts into perspective how important the inauguration was. Biden has made it very clear dealing with COVID is job one, it's job two, it's job three. It sounds like immigration got on that list, but the reality is we've had a horrendous plan. We've talked about it on this show a ton, and this is how it plays out. Claire, you laid it out beautifully. I've got kids. I'm fortunate. Mine's a senior in high school and just lost essentially his senior year, right? Like it's totally different. I'm looking at the reaction of our producer, Brian Wildridge. He perked up in this conversation because he's got kids and he's experiencing this too. And so Claire, you definitely hit on something. And that's what happens when you have a dysfunctional system. I mean, good Lord, there's been no resources to support parents and families and businesses and everybody throughout this crisis, right? And so hopefully that will change. But this was a beautiful discussion, but we got to take a break. For Citizen Action, you can find us at citizenactionwi.org. When we come back, we're going to be joined by the Minocqua Brewing Company owner, Kirk Bangstad, and talk more about his SuperPAC and how and what they've been up to. Very exciting news. Again, you're listening to the Battleground Wisconsin. Welcome back to the Battleground Wisconsin. We are very fortunate to be joined by Kirk Bangstad. He is the owner of the Minocqua Brewing Company, which I'll let him tell us when it was started, but has a new SuperPAC that has gotten a lot of attention for rightfully taking on the horrendous, undemocratic actions of Senator Ron Johnson and Representative Tom Tiffany up in the northern neck of the woods. Kirk, thanks for joining us on the show today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you guys are doing what you do, especially in central and northern Wisconsin, where we don't have a lot of progressive love up here. So I appreciate it. Hear
you. And that sounds like partially why you started this PAC. I believe last year was because, right, you're up in northern Wisconsin. Let's be honest, a fairly Republican area, but, you feel like it's an area that we need to compete better in, I believe. Kirk, tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, this whole thing's kind of started when, I was running for assembly against Rob Swearingen. I knew I was going to lose, but I put my hat in the ring because they made us vote in April, the April spring elections. And we remember we were all locked down for the coronavirus and everybody was scared. And then all of a sudden there was this, the Republican majority legislature forced us to vote against Evers, requests and begging that we do something, by mail or delay it or something. And they made us vote, and it just infuriated me so much that I just called the Democratic Party office and I said, I don't care if I'm going to lose. Like, we got to hold these guys accountable for what they just did to us. So that was why I put my hat in the ring. And then slowly as I was running my brew pub all summer long, I could see the HEROES Act was passed by the House Republicans or the House Democrats. It was made a political football. It wasn't even touched by Mitch McConnell for 3 months. I knew that we weren't going to get a stimulus package that was going to help restaurants or brew pubs or breweries in Wisconsin. We weren't going to do it. And I knew that my tourism season was ending and it was going to get cold. And it's hard enough to make ends meet in the wintertime when the tourism's not really here in northern Wisconsin. And without any sort of a stimulus, I just knew I would have to lay off all my employees. So I was really pissed off that that I'd have to lay off everybody because the government couldn't get its act together and stop playing politics with small businesses' lives, which is what they did with me. So I went all in and I put a big Biden sign against, hung it on the side of my building, which was it's at the dead heart of Minocqua, and Minocqua is about as red as it gets in Wisconsin. So
strong business decision, Kirk. Very good decision. Michael Jordan is your consultant, I believe, huh?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it pissed off I pissed off so many people in town, but I'm like, I got to stand for this because it's Trump and Mitch McConnell that really screwed my business up and made me have to lay off my employees. So I'm going all in for Biden. That got a lot of news. And I was like, listen, if I can get all this news for just hanging a Biden sign up, and kind of sticking my neck out, I sold $100,000 worth of T-shirts across the country because I had to close down. I blamed those guys for it. And the Republican county board said I had to take my sign down or they'd fine me because it broke a size rule. I was like, screw that, man. That's not happening. So I said, let's raise some money to pay my fine so I can keep my Biden sign up. And instead of raising $8,000, I raised $100,000. So a part of me was like, this is bigger than just me, and it's bigger than the Minocqua Brewing Company. It's just all these small businesses and people thinking politicians are screwing with them and don't care about us. So that was what and so I knew I went to Costa Rica. I had to get out of Wisconsin. I had to forget about Wisconsin for a while after I got crushed in the assembly race. And so I went, I went away for a couple of months. And while I was out in the wilderness, I was like, something got started here that was really cool. And I don't think I want to stop it. And so I decided to start the SuperPAC, where 5% of all my profits go to what I call dark money meant for good. And it was awesome. Before Tom Tiffany even voted to, he signed on with the Texas lawsuit against Wisconsinites. Ron Johnson said the election was flawed and it should go to Trump. These guys were saying that for 2 months. But they also voted against the stimulus package, which that's kind of been forgotten about because there's been this attack on our Capitol. But what happened before that was they voted against the stimulus package to help restaurants, brew pubs, and breweries survive right now. And yet again, they let us twist in the wind. And there's so many breweries, restaurants, tap rooms are empty. Beer's just sitting in fermenters right now. We need help. And these guys voted against it. So I was already starting this PAC. I was going to launch it at the beginning of the year. And then all of a sudden, just because these guys are not for small business, it wasn't really because they were traitors or seditionists at that point. It was because they're anti-small business, and I was like, this is a bipartisan issue. Small business is small business. You don't got to be a Democrat or Republican, but these guys are voting against us, so. And then all of a sudden, January 6th hit, and we had this insurrection in our Capitol, and I had this SuperPAC meant for these guys. These guys who perpetuated the lie that Trump won the election, that people latched onto who were listening to QAnon. This lie, if it's perpetuated by our U.S. senator and by our congressman, it's more believable. And so people took up arms and violence against our country directly because politicians like Tom Tiffany and Ron Johnson told them it was okay to do that. And that's why I put up this sign. I was like, okay, well, we've raised a lot of money because everybody's so pissed at these guys that they're just donating money to me. They don't even know what I'm going to do with this money yet, but I'm saying just because they're the targets, I also targeted Rob Swearingen for being a rubber stamp against COVID in Wisconsin. He's our state legislator, but we're focused on Tiffany and Johnson right now. And we've raised probably like now about $65,000 in about 12 days because these guys are traitors to our country. And we put up these big signs on the major highways in central and northern Wisconsin that say they must resign. I had a lot better choice of words that was rejected by the sign company earlier, but those are the ones they allowed us to put on. So,
Robert, I know you have a question.
So, Kirk, I think it's great what you're doing. Love your passion. That was a wonderful description of it.
Thanks.
By the way, people who know me know I'm a craft beer aficionado. I can prove it. There's my Minocqua Brewing Company class.
All right, man.
And can't wait for us to have government that fixes COVID so I can get back there and other great microbreweries around the state. By the way, my father's a writer on food and culture, and he's taught me that oftentimes food is connected to democracy, especially food like beer, right? So I do think there's a connection there. And he loves this. He lives in Illinois, but he just loves what you're doing because this proves his thesis about the importance of at least people's food, not elite food, right?
Yeah.
And so you said something about, I love the activism and you're taking it on and being a leader. That's what we need right now in this moment. You said something about disinvestment in the North Woods and North Central Wisconsin. This used to be David Obey territory. Can you say a little bit about that? There's a lot of people, we're in that school of thought, our national network, People's Action, is that we got to talk to everyone, that we start deciding we shouldn't talk to people and shouldn't be in certain areas because they're too red. That's part of the problem here. And that's why your leadership is critical to fill a void, but hopefully it sets a message that other folks who have money should not be abandoning the North Woods and North Central Wisconsin.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, God bless them, they got us 20 more thousand votes to get Biden elected. So, I appreciate everything they're doing. But ever since Obey left this district, and we've lost the first election when post Obey, they've abandoned. They really don't. They've abandoned central and northern Wisconsin, and they see the writing on the wall. They see that we're going to get crushed up here in terms of anybody who's running as on the Democratic Party, and so they're not putting much investment at all in this area. And when I believe it or not, I ran for Congress for a heartbeat 6 years ago, and against Sean Duffy, and I saw, and I dropped out of the race before the election because I saw how little Democrats, even nationwide and at the state level, cared about this area. So I said, there's no way, this is going to happen. So this is the reason I'm starting the SuperPAC. I don't want to have to depend on money from the Democratic Party to change things in central and northern Wisconsin. And if I can raise the money myself and potentially partner with you guys and other progressive organizations, I'll donate the money to whoever's doing the work on the ground. But if somehow I can be a symbol and people can donate for me from Madison and Milwaukee and New York and California because they see something that's cool, then that's great. I'm getting rich progressive money from outside of the North Woods to change the North Woods, and that's what needs to happen. So that's my goal, and we'll see what happens. I think right now it's people are excited. They're excited about the beer, and hopefully we can raise more money for the PAC.
Well, Kirk, we really appreciate, first of all, that you ran for office, that you're getting involved, that you are putting 5% of your profits into trying to change your community. That's a real commitment. And really appreciate the fact that you took some time out to come and talk to our listeners about what you're doing. We'll put a link on to how they can get involved and hook up with your SuperPAC, but on our website. Kirk, thanks so much for what you're doing and for joining us.
You're welcome. Appreciate it.
And with that, folks, we got to take a break. Again, you're listening to the Battleground Wisconsin, we're Citizen Action. You can find us at citizenactionwi.org. All right. Welcome back to the Battleground Wisconsin. We are very fortunate to have another guest with us. We've had Isiah Holmes on before. Isiah is an outstanding reporter with the Wisconsin Examiner, which we've talked about. We think they're an amazing media source here in Wisconsin. Isiah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Look, we have Isiah on because he's doing a whole series on that follows local policing. It's been fantastic. Encourage you to check it out. But one of the key areas that Isiah has been writing about, broke a big story last week, has been talking about it for a long time, is Wauwatosa and what's been going on with the Wauwatosa Police Department. Everybody knows the background. We've talked about what's been happening in Tosa, but in particular, Isiah, you broke the story about how they have targeted the mayor, and then also new news about targeting protesters. Isiah, tell our listeners more.
Of course. And like you said, this was part of our local policing series, which both me and my colleague Henry Redmond are doing together. So in terms of the targeting of the mayor, I filed several open records requests with the Wauwatosa Police Department over the last several months. And as January came around, started to receive responses to some of those. A bunch of them were interrelated with other media outlets, but the emails that showed that the PowerPoint where the mayor had been placed on a high value target list were initially only sent to me. So what these emails showed, and I specifically requested emails within the inboxes of officers who were part of WPD's Special Operations Group. And this is a unit that specializes in covert surveillance and cell phone data extraction. And they're supposed to do things like armed robbery investigations, OD investigations, vice, things like that. It seems like they've been really honed in on the protesters over this time. So this PowerPoint was an investigative PowerPoint, which was sent from a SOG, Special Operations Group detective, to a supervisor in their investigative division, which has other detectives and things like that. And the PowerPoint slide had to do with the incident that occurred at Officer Joseph Mensah's house in August. And it identified 4 high-value targets, one of whom was Mayor Dennis McBride. And he was identified as a high-value target. His PowerPoint slide specifically said that he had allegedly sanctioned violence against Joseph Mensah. It mentioned the Q&A sessions and the private meetings he had with protesters, with lawyer Kimberly Motley and others. And just for the record, he had also had those private meetings with Chief Barry Weber. This was not an unusual thing for Mayor McBride to do. He's the mayor. And then the last bullet point on there, it said no PC for probable cause for involvement in the Mensah shooting ... yet. So when I showed that to the mayor, he was pretty shocked. And he, I guess, went to city officials like Barry Weber, who said that he knew nothing about it and an internal investigation is happening.
Isiah, this is great work. Your work, the work of Henry Redmond, the other journalist at Wisconsin Examiner, and great to have Wisconsin Examiner to have both of you and other great reporters on that staff. And this is real investigative reporting. It's what's leaving journalism because of the cuts in metro for-profit newspapers, but it's nonprofits like Wisconsin Examiner that are the future and are growing. And it just seems to me, and I know you've been very fact-based in what you've been describing, and you've covered the whole Wauwatosa protest movement over the summer, soup to nuts. You've covered a lot of interesting things. But on this, it really makes the police seem like some private security force or a gang, even though they're public employees and they have so much power, they feel impunity. They can target people who are peaceful protesters who are doing the most fundamentally American thing you can do, because that's what founded the country is protest, right? Mm-hmm. And target the mayor, right, of the city and are untouchable. And so it's just really scary. It's going to be really hard to correct this, that they would even think this is reasonable to use public resources designed for, investigating violent criminals, right, and kind of FBI-like capacities on protesters and think that they can just treat them as the enemy. It's just stunning. I don't know. I know you're a journalist. You want to be fact-based, Isiah, but have you been surprised by what you've learned in Wauwatosa? I mean, you're an African-American man. You've experienced a lot in your life, but how shocked are you? Or are you just know this is how it works and you're finding what you expected?
Part of me wasn't shocked because I'm familiar with how far the Wauwatosa Police Department will go for sometimes what people would consider otherwise, innocuous things. But part of me was surprised at how over the course of these protests, it just seems like the aggression and the tactics had no end. First it was the marked cars shadowing, then it was the black cars. Now they're taking pictures of people, including me. Now they're saying my name and other people's names in the protests. Now there's a list. Now there's more lists. What's at the end of that list? Who knows? Who's on the list? Who knows? So so part of me was, and part of me wasn't. But I think that a big issue right now is that the city of Wauwatosa and people in Wauwatosa really need to face reality and face kind of their issues right now, whether that's a police department that acts like a dictatorship in a way, or it's teenagers who have drug addiction issues. These issues really need to be talked about and faced. And right now we just had a Wauwatosa Police and Fire Commission meeting that did not, to my knowledge, talk about the internal investigation that's allegedly launched and et cetera. And by the way, the police chief saying that he didn't know about the PowerPoint being made, you would imagine that since the Wauwatosa Police Department was investigating the incident at Mensa's house, that was a very important investigation. And there aren't that many. There's 90 or so officers with the Wauwatosa Police Department. There's only a couple captains and several lieutenants. And with the investigative division, when you look at their annual reports, there's actually a pretty clear and easy chain of command between the supervisor who sent this PowerPoint and the chief. So you got to wonder, okay, well, who's doing the internal investigation? Did the PowerPoint make it up to the patrol division captain who's the head of that lieutenant? And if so, then is the chief doing his own doing the investigation, or is that captain? What's happening? And Police Chief Weber has shown in the past with Joseph Mensa, not only with the 3 police shootings, but also the other issues which were discovered later on with the squad crashes, and also with Officer Olson, who punched the teenager in the face at Mayfair Mall. There are officers who have these recurring issues, and then it seems like in the department there's all these excuses made as to why it's not really a problem. So what is going to be the discipline, quote unquote, that the mayor promised us with the internal investigation is a few SOG officers going to have to go home with pay for a week? So people in Wauwatosa really need to kind of confront these things.
So Isiah, look, I think this story highlights exactly what you just brought up. I mean, we were talking about, we didn't think the mayor was responding at all. Like, we thought in many ways he was extraordinarily passive when this stuff was going on. So like the idea that they would see him as a threat is shocking, like to us, not that the police would overreach, as you say. But the way this was handled, given McBride seemed to be hardly someone who was like a rallying advocate of protesters. So that's what your story really shows. Who's in charge? This is complete rogue. Like, there is no one in charge. The mayor doesn't seem to have control. The city council does. The people clearly don't. Isiah, before you go, I need to get you to quickly let our listeners know about, and because we're going to talk more about this with our next guest, what just happened in Milwaukee, in the city of Milwaukee, which is another really important news related to policing. The city of Milwaukee had very, to much fanfare, and we had talked about it, thought it was very important, historic move that they had rejected federal funding for additional police. That was reversed this past week, is my understanding.
Yeah, sure. So the city of Milwaukee just kind of did this kind of back and forth with the federal cops grant, which would have added more personnel to the Milwaukee Police Department. And right now, from what I'm hearing from community activists and community organizers on the ground, it's really bothering them because it seems like there are calls to kind of reallocate and rethink how community services should work aren't being heard. And it seems like, and especially, I just came from the South Side the other day at a demonstration, talking to people who were saying, when Operation Legend was happening, we could see the activity, we could see the federal activity in our neighborhoods, we could see the blacked out cars. It's scary, and it makes one wonder. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that occurred, but it seems like the fight continues, and people aren't deterred. People are still pounding pavement out there.
Well, Isiah, we got to roll.
Thank you.
Yes, we're going to be joined in the very next segment by Markasa Tucker from the African-American Roundtable, but you're listening to Battleground Wisconsin. Welcome back to the Battleground Wisconsin. We're really fortunate to be joined by Markasa Tucker. She is the executive director of the African-American Roundtable. They have been very active here in Milwaukee for a number of years and have been a leading advocates around police accountability. Markasa, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So before the break, we had Isiah Holmes on, and he previewed that the city overturned and changed their position on some federal resources for additional police officers. Wanted to get the African-American Roundtable's thoughts and responses to this, and then anything that for our listeners who feel similarly that they might be able to do following this.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to share. So this is something that the Common Council was battling through all last year, but we know after 2019's Liberate MKE's win, the Fed said that they were going to be sending this money in, like Isiah said, through Operation Legend, really in regards to, I think it was really around like the speeding, whatever we are calling it. But the money was going to be used to bring in more officers. And so all throughout last year, while there's unrest, George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor, this conversation is coming up for Common Council. The Liberate MKE campaign launched in 2019, demanding a divestment of $25 million. And last year we upped it to $75 million. So they had a lot of things to really consider about this federal money. And so they decided at the end of the year that they weren't going to accept it. They voted a big fat no. Alderwoman Shantia Lewis abstained from the vote. And who else voted? I don't remember who all voted, but I know she was the only one who abstained. And what ended up happening during that Common Council meeting, Alderman Hamilton brought a resolution saying, hey, can we get the police to say, if, we accept this money, you guys will do X, Y, and Z. And this was when, who was the last chief? We have so many chiefs right now. The one who was interim.
Morales.
No, not Morales, the one who came after him. I forgot his name, but he was an interim after Morales left. He was like the second in command. I forgot his name. But he pretty much was saying, like, we can't agree to these terms and this new resolution. And it was pretty much them saying, like, we're not going to be held accountable to whatever it is that you're trying to hold us accountable to. And so ultimately, again, they voted no. And then during the Common Council meeting, Alderwoman Dodd brings it back to life and literally says, hey, I'd like to put this back on the table. I want to talk about it again in January. And so we were just stunned, but we do celebrate that, this hasn't happened, I don't believe, around the country where a Common Council actually rejected the money. Now, what's really unfortunate, of course, is what happened earlier this week when they decided that they would keep the money. And so the conversation on Tuesday was Alderman Hamilton went to now the next new interim police chief. So now there's another one versus the one that was in December, and just talked about this resolution, the things that they would expect from them, some reform ideas and how they work together with the Common Council to be accountable and to do these things. And so once he got an agreement from this interim new police chief, who may not, I think his name is Norma, who may not even be around for the rest of the year or however long, depending on what the Fire and Police Commission does, which is, also up in smoke. They decided based on those things, and Shantia decided to chime in and agree. Oh yeah, I think that because we have some cooperation from the police and who say they'll do this thing, yes, I think like this is a good idea. Dodd talked about new administration, in the White House, as if that means anything locally, what's going to happen here. Granted, yeah, it's Fed money, but we can't wait for the feds to come in and save us. Well, maybe they'll say that the COPS grant can be used 15, for 15 new officers, but like 15 like public health, people. We can't depend on hopes and dreams when it comes to the federal government or the DOJ or police. Like, we can't go off of these conversations that we've had years and years and years, and still Black people are being murdered by police. I don't care what you put into place, as long as the system of policing is still in place, this is what's going to happen. And so, very unfortunate, they re-voted, and Alderwoman Dodd changed her vote to yes. Alderman Hamilton, I don't remember if he voted yes last time or not, but either way it goes, it went through. But the three people that did change their vote was Hamilton, Dodd, and Lewis. Yes, I do know that for sure, because that's the social media post that we put up. So they're going to get $9.7 million to hire 30 more cops for 3 years. And after that, we're stuck with paying their salaries, along with all the misconduct cases, which are like 35 million, and along with the police pensions that we'll have to pay out. And as we're telling people, like, this city could ultimately be bankrupt, honestly.
So what do you, I agree with you. We thought this was pretty historic when they made that vote. And so this change is disappointing. What do you tell folks, our listeners, people who've been involved in the activities over the last year? What should they do? What are you calling for people to do? And more importantly, how can they also get involved with the effort of the African-American Roundtable in the fight for justice on policing?
Absolutely. So one thing that we're continuing to do is have conversations in our community to identify existing community safety strategies. So we would like to do some asset mapping this year. If anyone's interested in helping us around that adventure, what is keeping our people safe already in the city? Things that people are not thinking about. We're thinking about, youth engagement opportunities and organizations and agencies, sexual assault support agencies. We have to lift up what is working so people don't keep going back to police. And we have to continue having conversations with people in our community and ask them the root of the question. We worked with Block for the last 2 years when they've been in the neighborhoods, just asking people, what does safety look like to you? And when we talk to people, they talk about jobs, they talk about green space, clean air, clean water, good education, access to healthcare. No one says police. And so we have to have the conversation with our communities to really lift up what it is they need, so that when they do talk to their alders, they're not saying, oh yeah, we need police, because we already know that there's no studies that anybody can find or data that more police equals more safety. We can't find that. So we have to be able to have conversations, and even inviting people to have conversations in their own families, in their own communities. Ask people, what is it that they really want? And then another thing, we need to organize in districts where the older people are not recognizing what the loudest part of the community is speaking. Now, I understand that some people are calling their alders, and saying, hey, we still need police. And again, those are areas where we feel like we still need to have more conversations with people to help them really understand and to speak what it is they really need. But we're looking to organize in those areas. So it's like, who knows of any community organizations and agencies that are in Shantia's district and that are in Dye's district? One thing that we do know is that in Nakia Dye's district, she has tons of police officers in her district. So we understand the pressure, but again, our voices, we know over the last 2 years during the budget hearings, have been the loudest. I can't say I know what's in their inboxes and their emails and who's called them, but I know who's been verbally the loudest out of the community, and that's been people who have been asking for defundment of the police.
So if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch and get involved?
Absolutely. They can email us at liberatemke@gmail.com. They can also visit our website, liberatemke.org, and sign up to receive updates on the work that we will be doing. We'll be reintroducing our campaign in probably the next couple of months and starting up some new coalition meetings. So if folks are interested in being a part of those coalition meetings, again, please go on the website, liberatemke.org, and sign up for updates.
Markasa, thank you so much. Thanks for us even being in the position of having this conversation. It's because of the years of organizing of a lot of folks that even made the first rejection of this possible. And we will make progress, but it takes the work that you said. So please, folks, reach out to Markasa and Liberate Milwaukee. Thank you so much, Markasa.
Thank you all. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks, folks. And with
Bye.
that, we got to wrap up this Battleground Wisconsin. We want to thank all of our guests. Wow, we had a lot of them. Markasa Tucker from the African-American Roundtable, Isiah Holmes, the amazing journalist over at the Wisconsin Examiner, and Kirk Bangstad, who is running the new SuperPAC at Minocqua Brewing Company. Of course, want to thank our producer, Brian Wildridge, who makes this happen every week. And we'll see you next week at the Battleground Wisconsin.